Today is day 46 and we are in Mark chapter 6, and we've got a lot to talk about: martyrdom, provision, walking on water, hard hearts, all of the things. It feels like just all these emotions, and it's just coming on quick, and this is intentional because Mark is showing us who Jesus is and how our human heart responds to him. So Jesus is powerful, friends, if we haven't figured that out yet. But he's also compassionate and sovereign, meaning that he's involved in everything, right? And yet, still, people reject him, misunderstand him, doubt him. But he keeps moving toward them. That is the beauty of the gospel, the hope of the gospel. God is a God who moves towards us. So here Jesus returns to his hometown. And they're like, isn't this the carpenter, Joseph's son? They reduced him to the familiar. Historically, Nazareth was this little village, like 300 to 400 people, where everybody knew everyone, right? It's a one-horse town. And in that culture, honor and shame were huge. And they could not reconcile the fact that this little boy that they watched grow up has this authority that he now carries, right? Familiarity breeds unbelief. Isn't that the truth? I mean, how many of us, that's kind of one of the hard things about going home, going back to your parents' house, seeing family again for a long time or whatever, because what they remember is you at, 10, 12, 15. And it's like, well, I'm 45. I am not the same person, by God's grace, who I was then. Don't treat me like that. You can't treat me as a child. I'm a grown woman. Can we relate to that or what? So we can totally relate to this because Jesus goes home, a place where home should be safe, where home you can be who you are. And yet here they are rejecting him, because they're like, oh yeah, that was Mary's son. Remember Mary? We heard about what happened to Mary and Joseph. And, imagine all of the rumors, all of the behind gossiping and talk. And then not just that, Joseph, his father, the earthly father, was a carpenter, and that wasn't a dignified profession. Jesus was no one and nobody special. I remember I've said that there was probably 100 other little boys named Yeshua, Joshua, the great commander, the deliverer, into the promised land. And every little boy was named Yeshua, Jesus. In this one little bitty town where nobody from nowhere comes from. So Jesus marvels at their unbelief. And the word marvel is used. And so, which is interesting, right? And they don't, and it reminds me of the Old Testament scriptures where it says Jesus wasn't anything special. It does say that. He was, he was nothing to look at. And these people they're not in awe of Jesus. No, they marvel because they're offended. And this Greek word, it actually means, it's a scandal. Like, who do you think you are? But remember, Old Testament, the prophets were rejected. Joseph was rejected by his brothers. David was rejected by his family. And now here comes the Son of God. And he too is dismissed by his hometown. And we know even his brothers. So we see this thread throughout Scripture. Usually God's deliverer is often rejected first. Sometimes people closest to us, to you, as believers, they're going to struggle the most to see what God is doing in you. That's not going to stop God's work in you, right? Jesus doesn't force the belief. He just simply honors their response. And so in the same way, we must do the same. Some people are going to be like, oh yeah, she's a Christian? Right. It's not our responsibility to, prove them wrong. We simply walk through the supernatural and the divine, and we know the truth, and we simply, become light and salt and accept what other people say and know that we're in good company. So the next part, Jesus sends his disciples 2 by 2, and he now is giving them authority. But he tells them a couple things. We talked about this last time in Matthew. You got to travel light. Why? Because you got to depend on him, on God. In the first century Judaism, traveling teachers often carried their provisions, all the things. Jesus is teaching them to rely on God's provision through hospitality. God's mission moves forward through weakness, not excess. You guys, this in our culture and day to day, we're just going to have to sit with that one for a little bit. God moves through weakness. In my weakness, he is strong. He doesn't move through excess. That's why one of the reasons the prosperity gospel just gets a bad rap, and it's not a good thing. It's not a good thing for the prosperity gospel to be this prosperity gospel. It's, where are you depending on the Lord? It's hard to judge, friends, and I don't call us to do that at all. But we need to be discernful and recognize the way that Jesus sent his guys and the way he lived it. Something to think about. So, again, this echoes the Exodus, where God delivered manna daily. Elijah was fed by ravens. The early church, we will see, becomes so dependent on shared hospitality. When God sends you, he will supply all your needs according to his riches and glory. So we're interrupted in this chapter with a sort of a flashback. Just very similar to Matthew, where King Herod Antipas hears about Jesus and fears that John the Baptist has been risen from the dead. If I will remind you, Herod was the ruler over Galilee by Rome. Rome gave him that authority, and he was unlawfully married to this chick named Herodias, his brother's wife. And John publicly rebukes this, and so then John the Baptist is imprisoned, and Herodias manipulates all of these events, and sure enough, before the end of it, John is beheaded. And it's dark. John is Jesus' cousin. The ambassador for Jesus, the one who comes before him, and he is dead. Faithfulness, I've said this before, doesn't guarantee safety. We were never called to be safe, right? And John dies violently. And so, our theology here this is a theology of suffering. God's kingdom will advance. It continues to advance, but it does not eliminate persecution, sadness, death, destruction. We weren't called to be safe. The prophets were persecuted. Jesus is persecuted. He's going to be executed in the most horrific way under Roman authority by law. Overall, obedience doesn't mean life's easy, but it gives us purpose to something higher, something greater, to a kingdom that is not of this world and doesn't abide by the rules of this world. So the apostles return and they're exhausted. And I love this part because Jesus says, "Come away by yourselves with me and rest." Again, talking about rest, and Jesus prioritizes rest. And of course, people follow. And this is one of the most beautiful lines in Mark. It said he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. That phrase comes from Numbers 27 and Ezekiel 34. And in Ezekiel, God condemns Israel's shepherds because he's like, I myself will shepherd my people. And sure enough, praise God, Jesus is here. And what's he doing? He's feeding them in the wilderness, just like he did in Exodus, just like he said in Ezekiel. He is the bread in the wilderness. Jesus is the source of it. This miracle reveals that Jesus is greater than Moses. He is the divine shepherd. He is the provider, and he's a God who multiplies loaves and fishes. He involves his disciples into it. He tells them, organize the crowd, structure them, put them in groups. God doesn't work in chaos. He works in abundance. And sure enough, 12 baskets for the disciples who were tired, who needed to be fed to, who needed to be provided for too. They get the overabundance, the greatest leftovers ever. Jesus doesn't just meet needs, right? He overflows in them. Our cup runs over, like the psalmist says, because he provides exactly what you need. So then Jesus again sends the disciples off, and there's a storm. This is really important. Another storm. It's not accidental. They do exactly what Jesus says. They are obedient. And he sees them struggling and afraid. And they're professionals at this, right? And what the Greek says in this word, it means that they prolonged, their struggle was prolonged. And man, y'all, the God who provides in abundance, who tells the sea to be still, can walk on the water in the middle of the storm. Holy cow, friends. God walks on water. And it even says that he intended to pass them by, like, what's up, y'all? Isn't that crazy? It sounds so weird. But you see, in Exodus 33, it says that God passed by Moses, revealing his glory. This is a divine revelation sort of moment. Is it a ghost? Take heart. It is I. I am the one who made the sea. He's echoing that same voice from the burning bush. So he controls fire, he controls water, he controls chaos in every realm. This is one of the most clearest moments where Jesus reveals his divinity. But the disciples are terrified, right? It says that they didn't even understand, they didn't understand what was happening with the loaves, but their hearts were hardened, which is a little shocking because it's like you just had this authority as well, and not the same way, but you were given this. But what it shows us is that, even the disciples can struggle with a hard heart, because even those of us who are faithful can miss out on what Jesus is doing. But he still gets in the boat with us. He still calms storms. He still tells us, don't be afraid. He still provides for us. So then they are in Gennesaret again, and people, of course, recognize him immediately. And they run and they get their sick and bring them to him. Could you imagine? This time in history is really, really, it's dark. These are some dark days. So the oppression is, it's harsh. It's harsh. And so they're even touching his garment, and that brings healing. I love that part because I wonder, where was the woman with the issue of blood? Was she telling her story? Was she being faithful? Was she, a missionary, a preacher? It's amazing. Nazareth rejects Jesus. Herod kills disciples. Doubt is overwhelming, but the crowds reach out for him. Because, it's all about how we are coming to encounter him and experiencing Jesus. Joseph, David, the prophets, they were all rejected, like I said. But Christ is fulfilled. He is our true shepherd. He feeds his sheep. He guides them. We have a new Exodus where we have a wilderness bread, Jesus being greater than Moses. And not only that, but we see him walk on water, and he reveals that he is I am. And the kingdom comes not through power, but through weakness. The disciples depending on him, imperfect, but faithful. Sometimes doubtful, but faithful. Sometimes hardened, but faithful. That's the whole human experience, right? I mean, for real. Jesus is fully God and fully man. And he rules over storms. His sovereignty allows people like Herod to rule and Caesar. But no matter what, the mission continues through the disciples. And it continues today through us. How we respond to Jesus matters. And even though suffering does exist, it is a part of God's plan, and we have to continue forward in the faith, trusting God that his plan, his ways are so much greater. People aren't always going to believe. People are going to reject you. Leaders may oppress you, and oppose the truth. Jesus doesn't remove the storms, but he does provide. And you can see who he is. You can experience him. And he's going to get in that boat with you when you're struggling. Because Jesus is powerful. So clear. So will our hearts be soft enough to recognize him?